And Dr. Edith Zgut-Przybylska is with me now. Good evening to you, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
A pleasure to have you with us. So Péter Magyar says his government will work for a, quote, free European Europe. He's also open to a free European Hungary, rather. He's also open to the Eurozone, even when he addressed the media today. To be clear, is this a victory for Brussels and a defeat for Washington and Moscow?
Well, it's certainly a victory for Europe because Europe had to work with a Eurosceptic populist government for 16 years, which have been starting to take this very overtly pro-Russian stance and started lobbying for China and Russia at the same time and putting a lot of forks in the road. This is going to be markedly different because this government future government, the TISA leader promised to restore Hungary's position within the European mainstream, also restore access of Hungary to EU funds. This is going to be top priority. And in order to do that, it shows that the foreign policy of Hungary has to take a particularly different shift towards Europe and shifting away from Russia.
So do you think overnight, fundamentally, we've seen a complete shifting in the relationship between the EU and Hungary, just like that?
Well, super probably not overnight. Also because we're talking about a future government which haven't been in the game for quite some time, quite so long. They're still new. As far as I know, they're still foregrounding trust, or they're just about to start so within the EU Brussels bubbles. In contrast to, for instance, Donald Tusk's government, about whom I've heard that they have been quite actively engaging diplomats and others to tell them exactly what is the roadmap or what is going to happen to Poland if they take over and how they're planning to restore democracy and the rule of law. So this is a kind of a thing that is still remain to be seen, but this is definitely the thing that the soon-to-be inaugurated government is going to focus on. Foregrounding trust, that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's going to be quite similar strategy to Donald Tusk at the end of the day, to show a very pro-European approach, to be very cooperative on many things, but at the same time be critical in certain policy issues, meaning that TISA has been quite critical about the new multi-annual financial framework, for instance. The leader of TISA mentioned many times that he's very much focusing on national interest in certain things, just like Donald Tusk's government did in terms of, for instance, farmers' interests and many other issues. But for sure, what we have seen for 16 years that the government, just like PIS before, have been working against and depicting the European Union as an imperialist, evil creature. This era is gone.
You mentioned the farmers and some of those domestic issues. I mean, I guess the question is, are we seeing Europe's mainstream gather momentum ahead of all these elections we're going to see next year? So Poland, Spain, France, Italy. Or is Magyar's landslide simply down to 16 years of Orbán's state corruption, his state capture? People just saying enough is enough.
I don't think these are mutually exclusive. Both can be true. What I think is that Hungarian people have obviously had enough, not only because of what I just mentioned, that there was a certain shift from Europe towards Russia, and there has been a lot of skeletons falling out, not even skeletons. We've been knowing about this strategy of Viktor Orbán have been technically and his government functioning as an influencing agent within the European Union. But it became more and more obvious also because of these leaked tapes and conversation that were telling the story how Viktor Orbán has been going under the Russian government and working against the European interests. So Hungarian people had enough, especially the youth, who are quite anxious about not all these things that the government has been campaigning about. There has been a tremendous amount of propaganda, all focusing on Ukraine. Everything was blamed on Ukraine, that no matter how poor Hungary gets and how corrupt it is, or every problem technically is being blamed upon Ukraine. And you can lie to a certain amount of people for a certain amount of time, but you cannot do this, to all the people in an unlimited kind of, with the propaganda that we've been witnessing. And I think this was one of the reasons why the people have felt that they have had enough. Not to mention that the government has broken the most important social contract upon which this regime was functioning, meaning that we run on systemic corruption, we steal money, as you know, but it's going to be better for you too. So every day, by the day, you're going to feel that the country is going a good direction. This was the case in 2018, in 2022, but not this time. So every poll has been showing that the Hungarian society have been anxious not about Ukraine and the war. They have been anxious about crumbling public services, about huge inflation, about awful living standards, that obviously we are the most corrupt within the European Union. And that was the reason why they felt that they're not going to support this government anymore.
So walk me through then what the transition looks like from here. Magyar has, of course, called on the president to convene the parliament. He has, we understand, 30 days to do that and then resign. When do you expect Budapest to have an operating government, Magyar to be prime minister?
Well, which specific day depends on when the president is going to convene the parliament to get inaugurated. And this is a big question mark we're going to see.
And he's been called an Orbán puppet by Magyar, right?
Well, he's an appointee, and he's certainly not going to be cooperative, as we learned today. But anyway, I mean, the protocol is that the new government should be standing by the latest end of May, let's say. I think what will be interesting to see is how the state organs that have been captured in the meantime are going to be operating. And I think if the race would have been more close, I think everybody would be more anxious about this transition. I'm not saying that this is going to be smooth for sure, but right now that we have a quite convincing majority of TISA, I think it just raises the question, does it make sense for the outgoing government to butcher the constitution again? To hold the new government's hand tight too much? I mean, obviously, Péter Magyar already asked them not to do so. He also asked different captured leader state organs to step down. Otherwise, they're going to make them to do so later on, which signals that there is going to be a quite overwhelming constitutional remodeling to restore a democracy and rule of law. Yeah, so it's going to be still, I think, a quite interesting couple of weeks to see how different actors are going to move.
And he also said that Orbán should consult on all decisions while he is caretaker. Can we trust that that will happen? Because even today we heard these reports of Péter Magyar, the foreign minister. You mentioned those direct links with Russia, shredding documents in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Well, I'm pretty sure that they're trying to destroy as many evidence as possible about the last 16 years of systemic corruption and informal power. But I think that's the key. I mean, you can shred documents, but the problem is that the deep state, which is going to be there, goes much beyond everything which has been documented and contracted, because this is the key of this regime. I also wrote a book about it, recently got published, that the key theme of this regime have been that it has been run with informal power, that it was getting more and more difficult to define democratic backsliding and rule of law backsliding just by analyzing what type of contracts were made and how did they look like. So I think in the long run it's going to be quite difficult. How much can they be trusted? I think everybody got surprised how civilized way Viktor Orbán conceded and congratulated and seemed like that they might not want to turn the table upside down in the upcoming 30 days. But let's wait and see. They might act as sore losers. They might try to twist things just to make it harder for the future government to operate. But I think that's the thing. Knowing how much majority this new government will have, they might be just not easily, but turn things back to the way where they were, or like even where they were before Viktor Orbán took power in 2010.
We've seen, we're running out of time, but very briefly, I want to end with somewhat of a simple question. As a child in Budapest, Péter Magyar had a poster of Viktor Orbán hanging over his bed. This was, of course, at a time where Viktor Orbán was a leading figure in the country's pro-democracy movement. We've heard the conversation about Ukraine, the changing of tack. We've heard him obviously talk about wanting to boost Polish relations. So the rhetoric seems to be shifting in a different direction. But how can we be sure that Magyar will be different, or indeed that Viktor Orbán doesn't return in 4 years' time?
We cannot be sure, but I think there are quite some obvious constraints that will show that this new government will have a different democratic pathway, a way of quality of governance. One of them is the design of the party and how important it was that it was not just a centralized organization around a charismatic figurehead, it was also a bottom-down decentralized movement around the party. There is a lot of volunteers, there are a lot of people who have been voting for them. They're responsible for what they promised to these people, and they do not want to see informal power corruption and democratic backsliding whatsoever. They want to see the opposite. So this is one thing. The other thing is that, as I just said, top priority is going to be unfreezing EU money. Why would it make sense to build something very similar if this is the primary reason why Hungary cannot get these funds? So I think this is going to be another very important constraint, which is not going to let Hungary go down the road of autocratization again, at least not in the next 4 years.
Dr. Edith Zgut-Przybylska, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all for World News tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more news and analysis. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.